Welcome to the Behavioral Economics Today podcast. So this is our introductory podcast, and I have the pleasure of talking with Hugh Massie today. And it's really been such a pleasure, Hugh, sort of building what we have today at DNA Behavior. And so naturally, having a podcast was part of our sort of our ability to really showcase what we do. And I'm thrilled to have you here as our first guest. And this is really handing the reins over to you to host our future podcasts. And I think it's really quite interesting since I joined back in 2012, just the evolution of behavioral science, and it's been happening around the world. And then we have the introduction of AI over the last 24 months, which has really revolutionized our business. And I think, I've always considered you a futurist. And so it's interesting to see how the intersection of AI and behavioral economics are really intersecting. And it's really an optimal time to be having these types of discussions with organizations. And I know you get excited about it because I do as well. So I think what we'll do today, Hugh, is I'll just introduce a little bit about what we've been doing here. And then I've got a number of questions that I'd like to ask you, sort of your vision of really where sort of behavioral science is going to be going in the future. All right.
All right. Well, Leon, I'm excited to have this conversation with you, and genuinely appreciate your loyalty, friendship, inputs, wisdom as well from your heart over the last 12 years, and probably depending on what we all believe, maybe you've been in my life for longer than that. But we're partners in crime on taking behavioral economics forward.
Wonderful. And thank you, Hugh. That means so much. And I agree. That was definitely destiny, that lunch that we had in 2011, where I was able to listen to you and really your wisdom. And I didn't realize at the time what a futurist you really were, because we were talking about some of this back at that lunch. So that's what's fascinating about where we are today. So for decades, behavioral economics has transformed our understanding of human decision making. It challenges the assumption that people always act rationally, and we know that's not always true, especially when emotions get in the way. It revealed the biases, the heuristics, the emotional factors that really form our choices. But the field is really quite evolving, and the next frontier is not simply understanding human behavior, it's understanding behavioral data. And, we've been talking about that for a number of years, to personalize decisions and improve outcomes at scale. And that's always been a challenge, for organizations, because you've been looking at data sort of an individual, but not collectively in an organization, the data enrichment piece. So we're going to talk about that today. So Hugh's the founder and chairman of DNA Behavior and the chairman of the Behavioral Economics Institute. He's an entrepreneur, a behavioral economist, and a pioneer in applying behavioral data and personalization to decision-making in financial services, leadership, and human development. Hugh, you spent literally over 3 decades studying the intersection of behavior, economics, and technology, and the human potential. It's fascinating when we've talked about some of your past experiences when you were in school and university and sort of in your career. You really were studying it probably even as a young child, I'm sure. Right. So welcome. And this is our introductory podcast. And I'm going to be handing the keys over to you to host our future podcasts. And at the end of the show, I'll really invite others to how to find us and apply to be a guest on the show. So before we get started, did you have anything else to add to that, Hugh?
No, I think that's a great setup and introduction. And I think just in understanding something about me, I think that when I was a child and younger, I think family members and friends of the family always thought that I was consumed by money. And I think when people have that perception that it's more about greed and making money, whereas as I look back on my life now, that it's really that I see the world through the lens of people. Even though as you know, in my DNA style, I'm an initiator, I'm about as rational naturally in my hard wiring, which we measure at DNA Behavior, I'm about as rational and results driven as you would ever get. But I see the world through the lens of people. And I think that then that brings the gift that, given I started life as an accountant, my professional life, of being able to align numbers and people to get to the optimal result. And I think that's the deep belief, but also the action and core to who I am. And, however things play themselves out in whatever setting, that's Leon, my mindset and approach to it is to get the numbers and people aligned. And that may not always mean it's the maximum number, but it probably is the maximum number for that individual if we're talking investing and wealth creation for them in their life or in a business, right? And it's, we can be very results driven saying, hey, we've got to maximize profits, but that could be causing a lot of stress somewhere, unhappy people, and it probably doesn't last. So what's the optimal? And I think that's where we've always got to bring the numbers and people together. But if we get the people part right, I think you'll find the numbers take care of themselves.
Absolutely, it's kinda like putting a puzzle together in many ways, having the right people in the right roles. I mean, we work on that every day here at DNA Behavior, but there's one thing that admire working with you is if we've got an issue or a problem, we can come to you and, we know providing options are really important, but you're one of the most rational individuals to problem solve, and it's one of the things I really enjoy working with you because you literally break things down in a very rational way and show a different perspective. And I think that that really helps me in my leadership at DNA Behavior and sort of the work we do in the company. So
And I think that's where we want to get people in the future, whether they're business leaders, investors, family leaders, the average person on the street buying things, consumers, people making decisions for their life, whether it's career decisions, is at the end of the day is, I suppose, it's getting that alignment between the quanta side of things and the qualia side of things. And, for the most part, people have been able to deal with the quanta side because the numbers are there, it's visible. But they haven't been able to deal with the qualia side because it is invisible and in some ways inaccessible. And I think where we've got to now, and technology is allowing this to happen, is to get that alignment. That was always my dream at the start of DNA Behavior. I can remember sitting there in our office in Sydney talking with Carol Pocklington and imagining that there was dashboards where there was numbers and there was people. And, guess what? Hey, presto, today in 2026, we've just built the behavioral operating system that can live live in any business. And AI allows us to do it. And it's really, well, I was going to say it's magic, but it's not because it's reality. But, and I suppose, Leon, I wish that we had this to 10 or 12 years ago, but, it is what it is. And we've had to go on a journey to learn everything step by step to, I think, be able to deliver the holy grail of human behavior in the sense that we can manage differences at scale, real time for any situation, any person, any decision. And that's what technology allows us to do. But you've got to have the right foundation, which is psychometrics, to do that. And we have that. And technology is now allowing us to do the rest.
yeah, because I can remember back in 2012 when we first met and we talked about the ability to integrate technology into platforms. And, that was our vision all along. And now it's really 2026, we start seeing, the ability for this behavioral layer to exist in organizations. It's fascinating that we're sort of here now.
We're talking about behavioral economics here. And at the end of the day, it all comes back to optimizing decisions. And I think that's really what applied behavioral economics is all about. That's really where we do better because we're good at coming up with solutions and applying it with, not just living in a research world with it and identifying, oh yeah, okay, based on a research study, people do X. They value, uh, you know, losses 2 times the opportunity to make a gain. I think that's it's important work. Don't let me say it's not, because our system is based on science research too, but how it's applied into different products, solutions, life settings is really important. And I think that's where, my message today for everyone listening would be behavior is everything. And we've got to understand behavior because it is at the epicenter of everything. Even in this automated world of AI, AI is programmed by humans. It's managed by humans. Therefore, there must be behavior involved. And therefore, it needs to be understood. And humans are complex. We measure 4,000 behavioral insights. I'm sure there's many more to come,
Hmm.
but no human can remember them all at once in relation to every person. But AI can be deployed to help us tap into those insights, to help an individual or a leader, an advisor, whoever, come up with the right decision.
Exactly. It's it's fascinating that it's all sort of coming coming now to sort of the meeting, the AI technology, sort of behavioral economics. Fascinating. So, Hugh, for the last 30 years, you've studied the intersection of behavioral science, finance, all coming together. What experiences led you to believe that understanding behavior was the missing link in this decision making process?
Yeah, I think if I come back to my reflection is sort of general level, is behavior is everything. But if I point it to some circumstances, perhaps, or situations, for example, one being when I worked as a tax specialist, and you know, I was trained to write very research-based advice and to be very technically correct. But I started to learn that if it was going to be valuable to a client, I had to understand it. So I had to figure out the clients who wanted just a summary and a graph or a flow chart, and those that wanted to read the whole thing. And that in the end, you couldn't get paid $50,000 for a tax advice letter if it wasn't 50 pages long, right? So you have to document it all, but people have got to understand it. And so I realized that's what I was doing, is managing that with different people and also managing the risk of tax. Everybody wants to minimize it. Some want to outright avoid it or evade it, but is understanding the penalty situation, what's reasonably arguable, and what could each person handle under pressure in relation to that? How far are they prepared to go? So I sort of learned to figure that out intuitively. But when my day was done with being a tax specialist and I wanted to set up a wealth management family office business, it was all with the goal of personalizing experiences to a level that private banks and wealth managers or a financial planner at the time couldn't do. That was what I was going to go and do. And I didn't have all the solutions to it. But I knew that even when the private bankers came to me to offer me solutions, they would just say, Hugh, after lunch, take me out to a nice lunch and then try and slam this solution in front of me and get me to sign. One tried to get me to sign it in the street on the walk back to the office after lunch. And it's like, nope. And I realized then that as I connected my gut feeling about these types of situations to my brain and why I was walking away from 80% of things put in front of me, if not 90%. It wasn't presented the right way. And all that person needed to do was offer me some options. And you probably would have got a yes to something. And it might have been for more than what they were offering.
Hmm.
And so this is all behavior. And then when I started DNA behavior, I started to really see that, if I put the same solution, mapped out a case study and put the same solution in front of 10 different people, I'd get 10 different responses because everybody is looking at the same situation differently. And that's behavioral biases. And that's what needs to be understood. And so that's really what we're talking about. So, for me, it was recognizing that really at the end of the day, behavior is everything. And then how could I measure it? And if I could measure it, I could provide personalization, but I could also help people make better decisions, grow their wealth, grow their life with less stress.
Exactly. So that kind of leads me to my next question. So behavioral economics is traditionally focused on biases and irrational decision making. How do you think the field has evolved over the last 25 years? Because you were really at the forefront of that back in the early 2000s.
Yeah, when I came to my realizations about human behavior, it was in September 1999 when a friend asked me what was I really passionate about and said, well, I want to help people all over the world become financially self-empowered. And at that time, I had the wealth management business. I go into my day journal. I've been writing about behavior for a few years, almost since I left Arthur Anderson, and writing down all these situations. And I wouldn't say prophecies, but people would ask me, well, Hugh, should I invest in X company? And I'd say, no, there's something wrong with the leadership. I didn't know completely why in every case, but I knew things were not in place. And it was about the people. And I'd say no. And the answer would come true later on. And it was the same with dealing with the client. So I knew there was something, big in this and that people did have biases. It wasn't, financial planning wasn't supposed to be just about a risk profile, but that's what it got reduced to. And it still today is largely that, although we do talk about biases more. And, we launched the first version of DNA, the DNA system, so the financial DNA system, as it was called then in 2001, based on the fact that people have natural hardwired behavior, which later on Daniel Kahneman, referred to as system one behavior, the automatic biases. So we were spot on with that 10 years before, Daniel Kahneman's book Thinking Fast and Slow came out, we were already separating level or system one and system two decision making, as Kahneman calls it. We've always called it back then level one and level two. You can pick whichever direction you want to go, but that was foundational. And in 2002, Daniel Kahneman, quite deservedly so, gets his Nobel Prize for prospect theory and really starts to put behavioral economics and, later to become behavioral finance as a subset on the map, based on the fact that, humans aren't rational. There are these biases and a lot of them can be seen through the lens of prospect theory. And, but the thing is there's been a plethora of research since then, but we've been the one there with the financial DNA, now the DNA behaviors measuring. And that's a big difference, it's being able to measure the biases that others have come up with, because it all is linked to personality.
Mhm.
But the world spent time just talking about biases. Then we got on to nudging. Okay, that if we can understand humans, can we direct them to outcomes that we want? There's nudging theories applied on savings. If you deduct some money out of every person's pay packet, and then that's pushed into some sort of savings scheme, 401k in the US or in Australia, superannuation, they're going to grow their wealth. And the way but that's a nudge, but it's done a lot in retail sales. Everything that we do online, we're getting nudged somewhere, whether we like it or not. But and then the third wave of it, which Mears Statman, who I'll be interviewing soon, has brought to the fore, is looking at, or behavioral finance needs to be looking at the human in terms holistically on their well-being. And I agree with that. And that was a lot of the financial DNA book in 2006 that I published, about helping people. If you can understand your financial personality, you can build a quality life. And Mia's written I think a really good book on it about human well-being. And I think that's the evolution, but we're about to go through another stage, I think, with behavioral economics. Leon.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love to dive a little deeper in that. But speaking of Meir Statman, he describes 3 generations of behavioral finance. Could you walk us through those generations and explain why they matter?
Well, I think the first generation is recognizing that humans aren't rational and that we have these biases. The next generation, we got to talking about nudging, which is, somewhat of an application of biases and recognizing that they're there. And then the third part is addressing the human holistically and looking at a person's well-being. And that, I look at some of that as, well, health's important, right? So what decisions do you make? Is it about making the most money, or is it looking after your health? And that every dimension of your life it's interwoven. And that's where the optimization comes. And that's where decisions need to be made that optimize every aspect of your life, because there's no point being, hate to say it, Steve Jobs, incredibly successful entrepreneur, innovator, with Apple and Pixar and whatnot, but dying at 56 years old. And yeah, great legacy for the world, but there's other trail of destruction there and health. And, I think that what, Mears talked about, and I don't think we addressed it in 2006 completely from a health lens, but longevity being important. And it's the longevity of your life, but also the longevity of your money. And there's a lot of decision making around that.
Absolutely. One of the things, sort of, you wrote the money energy paper a couple of years ago, and it really is, because everybody has a money energy sort of, toward, and sometimes people don't even realize what it is. And when you break it down the way you've done it through a numbering sort of exercise, it really helps people realize, because, you and I spend a lot of time on health and wellness talking about, longevity, sort of, things that really impact our longevity, our health. So this is really sort of that next frontier. And I'd love for you to talk about, because you mentioned the 4th generation of behavioral economics. So I have a feeling there's probably some indications of that.
Well, I think that, while you've raised money energy, I think it's good to put that in perspective, because what we, again, ahead of our time, I suppose, with DNA behavior, came to realize in 2002 is when you look at the DNA helix, and we now call DNA deep natural architecture, but when you look at that, there's 2 strands on the helix. And so we look at the first strand as being the behavior, and the second strand being your energy. And they both work together. Your behavior reflects the energy that you're going to put on things, right? And how your life energy is going to drive forward. That is completely interwoven. And, with the money energy work, we looked at the relationship between money and its impact on your health, your mind, and your food and drink consumption, right? And central to all of those is stress. And when you unpack it, the money is all around the world, right? Money is somewhere around 75% of the cause of stress. And stress is what accelerates aging. And then aging is really the disease that causes all the other diseases to start to happen. And that's where now in wealth management, even just lately, there's been a paper put in the Journal of Financial Planning about, health, and that it's a decision-making issue. You could say that health would be a fourth generation, right, for behavioral economics, because the decisions we make about our health are completely interwoven um, into our overall lives. I don't think that behavioral economics just has to be about money, but money is there omnipresent in everything. But I would say that the fourth generation is about personalization, and that, there are biases. They're expressed in a one size fits all way at the moment. People value gains, losses to gains 2 to 1, right? Well, not tr- it's not necessarily true. Some would be a little less than that, and for a lot of people, it could be 3, 4, 5, if not 10 to 1 in a particular situation. So you've got to understand the human, and then the nudges. Also, we can talk about nudging strategies to get certain actions, but they also need to be customized for the human. So I think the fourth generation is really about personalization, but we've mentioned health. Health is going to be in there, whether that is tied up in personalization or it becomes actually the fifth generation, because we're all going to live for far longer. But the only way we can deal with health and money is to have a very precise, deep understanding of the human first.
Absolutely. Yeah, when you were talking about the helix strand and, it's the personality and then the energy, people that get caught up in addiction or, sort of maybe working in the wrong types of role because their family had a role being a doctor, or, it's not natural for them. So they go against the grain and they really never reach their potential. And I know that's one of the things you've always been a sort of big advocate, working in your natural strengths. You sort of, those things align themselves with health and wellness as well.
Absolutely. Because if you're living out of alignment to who you are, there will undoubtedly be stress somewhere. What I call bad stress. Working hard probably is not a problem. That just causes adrenaline. I mean, of course, you've got to balance that out. But we're talking about, systemic stress
Mhm.
where you're cringing every day you go to work. You can't sleep at night because, again, sleep's a big factor in your longevity. That's what we, are talking about.
So here now we could move into, we've talked about this in the past, but behavioral data is liquid gold. I was reading a paper you wrote back in the early 2000s around it being liquid gold, and now we're starting to see the ability with this behavioral layer. What do you mean by liquid gold? Just for the audience.
Well, we're really saying that behavioral data is so valuable. It's invisible. That's why it's not actually, it's not gold itself. We're, sort of talking metaphorically here, but it's so valuable, and that a lot of the data that organizations have, banks, credit card companies, wealth management firms, is what I call the hard data: transactional data, financial data, demographic data, and assumptions are being made about people. Personas are being made up about people, but we're not getting to the true depth there. So we could be saying that two people with $1 million living in the same cul-de-sac, married with 2 children, aged 40 years old, are the same people, but they're not. And their circumstances of getting there as well, if you want to call it from a learned behavior and life preferences perspective, are different. So if you're going to deal with people, you really need to understand the truth about them as humans, because one of them might be a very goal-driven person and the other person's a much more what I call feelings, risk-averse type person. Very different attitudes, and follows from that what their preferences are and how they deal with money, how they exercise, how they deal with people. Their life in the community can be very different. So in a way, what we're talking about is that if we can understand the human behavior, so using the psychometrics that we have at DNA Behavior, we can really get to the depth of who a person is with very, very specific measurements, which then allows for there to be precision, matching of people, advisor, client, salesperson, the matching of solutions to people based on, on their needs and the presentation to them of that at the right moment. That's why the behavioral data is liquid gold. And it should be every marketing and salesperson's dream to want to know everything about the people that they're selling to. We talk about that in sales. You got to know your customer, or you're presenting, you got to know your audience. Well, why not do that? And I think till now, it's been beyond us to have access to that data. Whereas today, we can have access to that data.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. Thank you for that. So, DNA Behavior's mission is humanizing data for personalized decision making or optimization. What does it actually mean in practice to make that happen?
So, making that happen means that you've got to measure the behavior of every person. So we're able to apply our psychometric system to every person on the universe if we want to, by deploying the digital scan. Which the digital scan works off open intelligence. So if we know who the person is and can identify them, the easiest way to do that for most people is in LinkedIn, but there are other ways to identify that we've got the right John Smith, or Peter Thiel, or whoever we want to, or Jeff Bezos, whoever the right person is, that we can match them up. And then with open intelligence, there's information about every person out there. So we're able to essentially been able to reverse engineer our own system using open intelligence sources and gathering data to get a pretty high prediction on who each person is. And I think that's the game changer in how human behavior is deployed, managed, utilized, because now you can do that mass scale. Like Leon, as you know, we were only talking with a client yesterday that's got 250,000 families. That's probably 750,000 individuals when you start to include some children, and a huge prospect base. We can provide, data enrichment for every client and prospect to allow them to execute pinpointed marketing, sales, meetings, offering of solutions, which is all going to then get down to helping the advisors who help work with those clients, help those clients make a better decision
Absolutely.
by, again, aligning the quanta and the qualia.
Hugh, for years, organizations have relied on segmentation and demographic profiling. Obviously, with digital scan, it kind of changes the game. Why is personalized or behavioral personalization becoming the next frontier, or will become the next frontier?
Because it leads, Leon, to extreme value creation opportunities, I think, that didn't exist before. Because if you're only dealing in the numbers, you're not getting to empathy. You're not getting to understanding how people are thinking and feeling and acting. You're making assumptions. Whereas now we can make people feel understood. And that's the key thing. And then we can get to more precise offerings, which at the end of the day, more quickly. So that means if you're the organization selling something, you can do it far more quickly. The A/B testing that you need to do can be reduced, because you can get the marketing pitches far more precisely. And whereas once upon a time it would have been considered a massive execution issue to segment communications across even sort of 2 styles or 4, now you can do it as deep as you want, because the technology allows you to do it. The AI allows that to happen if you want to do it. And so you should be able to connect with 98% of people at a 98% level. And that's really getting to the long tail of marketing. And that was a concept, back in the mid 2000s. It's a reality today. And you don't have to be an organization that struggles to serve your best 20% clients to an 80% level and it be a stressful issue. You can basically automatically do that. That should raise revenue, right? Have happier clients, and people are expecting it now. So if you're in wealth management, it should free up time for advisors. It should make life easier for the marketing, sales, relationship management end of the business. Investment selection should be better, which means compliance is better. Every angle of your business should be improved, becomes a safer business, better productivity for everybody. And so this is what can be done now. And personalization is the thing that unlocks all of those opportunities.
Absolutely. Let's dig a little bit deeper into organizations. How does behavioral data improve decision optimization in with an individual and in their organization or within an organization.
Yeah, I was only talking to somebody yesterday about it. And I think that if you've got to have because we were talking about the gap that exists with a brand. Some businesses have a really nice brand which says what they're going to do, but then there's what do they actually do? And that gap gets measured firstly through the client experience, I believe, or the customer experience. Is your brand stacking up against what you deliver and how you deliver it and the quality and how you've made the clients feel? And so any endeavor to improve a business, I believe, has got to start with the customers or the clients. That's a client-centered organization. But very quickly it gets to the employees, because if they're not happy, haven't got a great experience, it washes over to the clients. But I think what we're able to do now is help a leadership team look at where the problem areas in their business might be. So data might come in around client experience performance in an area, and that could be reflected in sales. It could be reflected in it taking too long to serve problems, people complaining, whatever the data is. Then if you just apply the principle that behavior is everything, behavior is everywhere, it's been caused by a person somewhere, and you can identify that. And it might be a combination of people. And again, that's the digital scanning allows us to see that instantly without everybody having to be profiled up front. While we would advocate to profile people at the end of the day, we can use the data analytics, because that's really what digital scanning is enhanced behavioral data analytics to get the intelligence. Uh, and Leon, taking it further, the area that I'm passionate about is leadership behavior and leadership financial behavior. And we did the exercise where we rated the performance of the S&P 500 companies based on their leadership financial behavior. And you could see that the top performing companies in their sectors had certain behaviors that are strong. And so no one could say that behavior isn't important or relevant. It's actually going to be a predictor of what's going to happen in the business.
Absolutely. And we've studied a few case studies where businesses were decimated for the most part because of behavior decisions at the top.
Right. And the ones that we've looked at ahead of time, we've seen it happen. And then you go and study cases like Boeing and others, and it all roots back to that.
Absolutely, it does. So now we move into a little bit of a topic that we've been front and center, AI, which is, something we really have a lot of passion for. Our behavioral co-pilots that we have sort of in place here at DNA Behavior, and I'm fascinated by sort of how we're moving that along. But what role do you see, Hugh, AI playing in the future of behavioral economics?
AI has a very big role to play, because I think that what AI does is it allows behavioral economics to be applied at scale. It takes behavioral economics away or moves it along from just being research based and here's a theory to actually applying it on a mass scale basis. And, there's some, organizations out there that are now, Allianz is a great case, I think, that, led out of Switzerland with their team there, where every division or part of the Allianz business, in a sense, has been behavioralized. And I know that Allianz could go way further with it, right? By utilizing AI, right? In terms of, product mix, product structures, how products are offered to clients, how people are managed, every dimension of the business, doesn't matter where it is or what it is, can be better managed. But we also have to be careful that AI, end of the day, AI is based on data. That's why data is so important, and why we're saying, back to the point on behavioral data is liquid gold, because AI is the catalyst for personalization. But we still have to know who the humans are, but it allows us to program up the solutions that get offered, the workflows, processes, products that are highly personalized to the individual. But it can't be done by individuals as well who are programming the AI guessing.
Hmm.
That's where we would say have a robust undercarriage, which is psychometrics, to allow the AI to be better and
So,
not just done from guessing. Otherwise, we don't move forward.
yeah. And also the ethical considerations with AI. You and I talk a lot about that, making sure it's done for the right reasons.
Got to be done for the right reasons. And I think that the ethical piece will always come up is where's the disclosure? And that's something that's really important, that, if people are being nudged to a solution or participating in something, they've got an option to opt in and or opt out. but we do leave some choice with the human is important. So I think some disclosure around that. But at the same time, when it comes to data analytics and behavioral data analytics, I mean, that's been going on for a long time already, preceding AI. All we're able to do is do it better now, right? But I think we do need to show the right level of concern for the human that they can participate in a, in at work, in management, whatever setting, that there's a right to opt in or opt out.
Yeah, very important. But it is exciting the scaling of it where we didn't have that ability, as well without AI.
It's a mindset for everyone that if, I suppose if you have a more of an abundance mindset that you can find, because AI is here to stay. AI in a way has been coming for a long time. I mean, technology has been around a while. So it's not all completely new, but I think that the generative AI, where we can have more essentially automated robots, performing functions, is obviously proliferating. So it's here. So, at the end of the day, everybody should embrace it, but we need to embrace it responsibly. And it does need to be checked. I think that humans need to, read the outputs before they hit send on emails and things like that. Uh, and that's also something that's important. Things need to be checked. If we've built a profile about a person using AI, or even if it's with active completion of our profile, it should still be discussed in some format, discussed with the person.
Always. Yeah, it's great. Kind of leveraging on, my earlier point about you being a futurist, because it's always interesting talking to you about sort of future topics. But looking ahead for the next 5 to 10 years, what does success look like if an organization fully embraces behavioral personalization and decision optimization?
Well, I think that if you embrace it the right way, then you're going to have fully optimized workforce. You will, in the end, have happier people, even though today people are stressed by, okay, what does it mean for me? And should I actually tell somebody how I did something so easily or quickly? It might cost me my job. I think that if we take an abundant view to it, people will end up in the right roles, right places for them. You can do far more exciting work far more quickly. If you're a wealth manager, today you're looking after 100 clients. In a couple of years' time, you should be able to look after 200 clients. You should be more productive and be happier. You're delivering better service to them because you know more about them. It's a better experience for everybody all around. Of course, we've got areas like, we talked about health today, Leon. I think that part can be integrated far better into wealth management decisions and how money gets dealt with and how choices people make for their lives. AI helps all of that, and the personalization philosophy helps.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we really move to, this concept of human lifetime economic value. I think that's got a role in wealth management, but I think just as a concept for life. And everybody's human lifetime economic value can be increased with AI, more consciousness of behavior, because we can get people more aligned to who they are, which allows growth and allows them to flourish.
Absolutely. It's
That's the
wonderful.
future state. More people flourishing, growing, less stressed.
And what do you think, Hugh, for the organizations that don't embrace that?
They won't be here. And, Price Waterhouse has done a good job with some research studies in 2024, backed up again in 2025. 45% of the CEOs of major companies are saying our businesses are at risk of not being here by 2030 to 32. And there's an avalanche coming. And I think a lot of it is around knowing how to innovate. I think that if AI is just about uh, managing productivity, it's not enough because everybody can do that. Yep, it's important to manage costs, get people doing more, but we're really what businesses are going to have to do to survive is they're going to have to make structural shifts in the way in which they, design, deliver, manage their products, and they're going to have to come up with more and more products. And in
Mhm.
the AI world, it's easier for a newcomer to get in the market. So everyone's going to have to be more nimble. But I think that's the threat, that we're going to see some well-known brands won't be around.
Yeah, I agree. So, Hugh, we've covered a wide range of topics today. So, as we close, what's one thing you would like the listeners to remember from today's discussion? And what is it going to be?
So I'd love it if everybody remembers that behavior is everything. And, behavior is wrapped up in every action, every decision, every interaction that you have. It needs to be managed, and AI can help you do that.
I agree. I've been, I studied behavior probably 10 years before I joined DNA behavior. And just, I believe that, within families, within organizations. So what we're doing here is really, pretty fascinating, leading edge. I wake up every day inspired by what we're doing. And I appreciate everything you've given me and the opportunity to be part of this team. It's been wonderful. And I just a couple things. Did you have any other comments, Hugh? I don't think.
No, I think just no more comments, Leon. Again, I'm appreciative for your support and running the team because as we know behaviorally, we've all got our strengths and struggles in that. No, doesn't matter how much one tries to modify, and there's some yin and yang there, and we'll keep on growing. And I think today, today's environment is set for DNA behavior. We've built the behavioral intelligence infrastructure to go and do this.
Absolutely. And just sort of in closing, remember behavioral data is liquid gold because it transforms information into understandable, into action, into better economic decisions and outcomes. It's really the promise of the fourth generation of behavioral economics. So as we close, I just want to make sure everybody knows you can find our podcasts on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. And if you'd like to be a guest on our show, there's a contact form on our website. It'll also be in the show notes. Hugh actually loves to interview individuals that are really doing something unique and different in human behavior. So please contact us and we'd love for you to be a guest on our show. Thank you.